are uniquely placed to have impact on gender equality. From the supplier side, a high percentage of small and medium-sized enterprises are run by women, and these enterprises are widely recognized as motors for growth in the world economy, representing around 80% of the global job market. Also, it's estimated that women-owned businesses reinvest up to 90% of their income in their families and communities. Thus, the increase in the participation of women in public procurement market translates into social and economic growth, which is particularly important in this time of COVID, which has increased female poverty. Next slide. So now more than ever, public policies to reduce these gaps are critical, and public procurement can indeed play an important role in achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 5 on gender equality and women's empowerment, and also to the SDGs 1 and 8 regarding poverty and economic growth. Next slide. So to that regard, the gender perspective in public procurement is of growing interest around the world, and there have been many advances. However, there's still a major gap. Worldwide, less than 1% of the estimated 10 trillion spent on global public procurement is awarded to women-owned businesses. And here in the Americas, in the United States, 40% of businesses are women-owned, but they make up only 4.7% of government contracts. In Latin America and the Caribbean, where public procurement represents around 30% of GDP, only 1% of the contracts are awarded to women and owned businesses. Next slide. So why is this the case? There are many barriers that women-owned businesses face, including, for example, barriers related to the design of tender. They're often too big, too complex, too many administrative and cost requirements. There are barriers related to size and qualifications, disproportionate requirements related to the financial health and turnover of the business. Often governments do this out of habit, requiring experience or certifications not necessary for the size and risk of tender at hand. For example, asking for 20 years experience and 100 employees for a small catering job. There are barriers related to access to information. Many women-owned businesses are in rural areas or lack access to the internet. Barriers related to business capabilities, for example, how to develop a bid. Barriers related to payment behavior. Governments are often late in paying. Small businesses don't have the financial cushion to absorb delay. Next slide, please. So what can a country do if they want to increase women's participation in the public procurement market? First is to have a good definition of a women-owned business or gender-responsive business, and this varies greatly among countries. Do a market study, identification of stakeholders, chambers of commerce, NGOs, women's ministries to work together. You need a diagnostic assessment. You need to know which women-owned businesses are selling to or have the potential to sell or to participate in the public procurement market. An action plan, and then finally an implementation of measures. Next slide, please. So while there are different approaches that governments can take, they're vertical, which refers to top-down policies, and horizontal, which includes measures that reduce barriers to entry. Some of the vertical policies include, for example, targets, subcontracting preferences, reservations, or set-asides. And then on the horizontal side, and in many countries, vertical measures might not be possible from a legal or political standpoint. And also you have to be very careful about not introducing distortions in the market. So countries often focus on horizontal measures that use a gender perspective to level the playing field. Many of these measures have the added benefit of supporting not just women-owned businesses, but also small businesses in general and other economically disadvantaged groups. For example, at the IDB, we're working on research on Indigenous peoples and on the LGBT community and on public procurement. It supports that finding. So what are some of the measures in this category? Design, simplifying, standardizing the tender process, requirements and criteria, making sure they're proportionate to the task at hand. Access to information, making information on public procurement opportunities public and easy to obtain, and training. The area of training is important to train public procurement officers on how to have a gender perspective, as this may be a completely new area for them. And on the supplier side, many buyers find it hard in practice to find qualified women-owned enterprises that compete at the same cost and quality as other businesses. That's why it's so important to support the supply side as well. Governments must establish programs that build capacity of women-owned businesses to compete successfully in public procurement markets. This can include, for example, post-tender feedback sessions, guidelines, and materials to help with this process, and training on how to draft competitive proposals, and also government paying behavior, make sure they pay on time. Next slide, please. So in Latin America, a number of countries are working towards gender-responsive public procurement. So I'm going to talk about two groups of countries. The first will include Honduras, Colombia, and Ecuador that are just kind of getting started, and more advanced countries of Argentina, Chile, and the Dominican Republic. In the case of Honduras, which began actually just over a year ago, 3 main steps have been taken so far. A diagnostic assessment was carried out to establish a baseline on women's participation in public procurement. Barriers to access in public procurement were identified. And work is underway to develop an action plan that will include the program Sello Mujer. And Sello Mujer is like women's certification program, so it's easier to identify which businesses are in fact women-owned. Next slide, please. In the case of Colombia, Colombia issued a presidential directive to prioritize women in the country's economic reactivation. In December the same year, a new entrepreneurship law that focused on public procurement with its ability to empower women and SMEs through public procurement, and the regulation detailed criteria for identifying women-led enterprises. And an interesting experience there is one for the mayor's office of Bogota, which set quotas for female labor participation among suppliers in public contracts. Next slide, please. Ecuador is developing a sustainable procurement strategy, which includes a gender perspective. In this case, the gender gaps in public procurement were raised, as well as barriers to participation were identified. And a key part of their strategy is the involvement of civil society. Next slide. In the case of Argentina, and here I'm talking about the city of Buenos Aires, is one of the largest and most developed metropolitan areas in the Southern Cone. They have an important presence of women-owned businesses in the economy and private sector commerce. However, this was not reflected in the city's suppliers, as they only represented 15% of the companies being awarded public sector contracts. So the government of the city of Buenos Aires undertook an important initiative to develop a certification program to generate data and incentivize the participation of women-owned businesses in the public procurement market. An important thing to highlight from this example is not only did the program certify ownership of the business, but also included a category of companies that were not necessarily women-owned, but had good corporate practices towards women, also very important. And it's also innovative because it was at the subnational level. Next slide. In the case of Chile, the strategy has been very horizontal, and the objective has been to make it as easy as possible for women-owned businesses to become a government supplier and access opportunities in the public procurement market. They've invested heavily in technology to lower transaction costs on the supplier side, and capacity building to educate women-owned businesses on the opportunities and tools available to them. And they've also invested in certifying women-owned businesses. And this enables them to generate data to benchmark and evaluate efforts in Chile, and also created an association of women suppliers that has become an invaluable platform to outreach businesses. Next slide. And my last case is Dominican Republic. And this is a country with a more example of a vertical strategy. To that regard, they have a law which sets out preferential purchasing to support small and medium-sized enterprises, and legislated 20% of purchases should be for businesses run by women. And their strategy is based on matching supply and demand, serving the goods and services that women-owned businesses were producing and matching them with demand in the public sector. They developed a supplier registry and catalog of women suppliers with more than 11,000 women registered. And they have an outreach program to support the promotion of women-owned businesses in non-traditional sectors like works, PPPs, et cetera. And finally, awareness building activities. So what are some of the lessons learned from this? Political will. These are very challenging reforms, and you need support and buy-in from the highest levels. You need to support the public procurement ecosystem, build alliances with the private sector, chambers of commerce, ministries that focus on women. Digital divide. While Latin America whole is fairly equal in terms of access to internet and mobile phones, it's not the same throughout all the countries, and I understand it's not the case in other parts of the world. You need to have good quality data. Good quality data that's collected and made publicly available is essential. That is why the certification programs are so important. You need data on how many procurement exercises are currently used to realize gender equality. National level indicators should be developed and updated on a regular basis. And you need to explore how gender equality is being addressed at different stages of the procurement cycle. Currently, most of the focus has been on the training of suppliers and selection criteria. This could be expanded to include, for example, market testing, end user engagement, risk identification and assessment, designing technical specifications, contract award criteria, and auditing, among many others. And finally, the need for capacity building. On the supplier side, many women-owned businesses have limited experience with public procurement. In the case of EGP, resistance to participation is not normally due to technical concerns, but rather often stems from a lack of basic familiarity with how to pursue business opportunities with the government. And on the procurement agency side, the lack of understanding on how to achieve gender objectives, the procurement practices remains to be a top challenge for policymakers. Next slide. And finally, it's important for countries to support each other. In the case of Latin America and Caribbean region, as part of the activities of the Inter-American Government Procurement Network, the countries signed a declaration in 2015 to promote women in public procurement. This provided a framework for the procurement agencies to collaborate and advance on the topic as a region. This photo is from a network meeting, including pioneers in the topic in the region from Chile, Dominican Republic, Argentina, as well as representatives from Jamaica and St. Lucia. Next slide. Finally, a few key points I'd like to leave you with. This is a road that cannot be traveled alone. It requires collaboration across all walks of life in the public sector, civil society, private sector, and beyond. Focus should be not only to promote and incentivize women-owned business participation, but we should strive to expand the economic results of such initiatives by mapping, acknowledging, rewarding the public procurement market and all companies that have progressive, inclusive, and state-of-the-art practices regarding gender and women. And finally, it's very important to keep in mind that supporting women in public procurement is the right thing to do, not just for women, but also in terms of overall social benefits and economic growth of a country. Gender-sensitive procurement means you're taking advantage of the whole universe of suppliers that could potentially access the public procurement market, thereby increasing competition and getting better value for money. And finally, better goods to citizens, which is a goal of any public procurement system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. That really gave us a great architecture for the rest of this discussion, because you've covered not only kind of the business case, but also gave a lot of really great examples of policy entry points, as well as private sector and civil society. And as you've kind of highlighted a couple of times, the word ecosystem. And I think that's something that's really interesting for us in Asia to learn from. And I should also acknowledge the fact that she is currently in Washington, I believe. And so this is a very, very good morning for you, Leslie. So thank you so much for joining. I'm sure that all of us here have learned quite a lot, and lots to think about. I would like to kind of move to our next speaker, who from WISE from Vietnam. So Ms. Hien Tu, who's the CEO of the Women's Initiative for Startups and Entrepreneurship. Hien, floor is yours.
Thank you, Keiko. Hello, everyone. Good morning, very early morning to Leslie, and good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to thank UN Women for inviting me to share WISE experience in working to support women entrepreneurship to connect to the global value chain and markets. And yes, to follow up Keiko's comments, I do learn a lot from Leslie's presentation. It was really rich, and a lot of information there on gender responsive procurement from with the government. So I am going to share with you the our experience in working to support women. To connect them to the market, especially the export market and global value chain, which is the topic for my sharing today. I hope that you can see my screen. I'm not sure. Do you see my screen?
Yeah. Yes, we can see
it very well.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Yeah. In WISE, we do different activities to support women entrepreneurship, to support women to start business as well as grow their business. And among many other activities, the topic today is about supporting them to go to the market and global value chains. And within this particular areas, we've done several activities, but based on our assessment and get to understand about the constraints of women, why women-led business cannot really connect to the markets and join the global value chains. There have been multiple efforts from different programs to really address these issues, but all have to start from the constraints of the women. And some of the issues actually have really similar to those that have been shared with the previous speaker. And in Vietnam, this is identified as the key constraints, key barriers, why women-led SMEs cannot really access the export market. The first is really the complicated market entry regulations. We all know that in order for an enterprise to be able to support, to export, they really need to understand the requirements of the export market. And the more advanced the market is, the more regulation and the more complicated the regulations are. And for women-led business, most of them are small and medium-sized enterprises. It is really difficult for them to understand all those requirements, ranging from the tax issues, the standards, certifications, rules of origin, the quality, a lot of things that they need to understand, let alone the demand for this market, the appetite of the customers, and who are the buyers in those markets. On those required a lot of investments from the enterprise. And that's why in some cases, especially for the EU markets, for example, the consulting service just to provide those market insights, market expertise may cost up to 50,000 euros for those services. So this is really unaffordable to women-led SMEs. And that's why many of them have chosen really to just limit their business within the country borders rather than exports. And of course, this relates to the capacity of the women-led SMEs. Capacity has a different have different size. I mean, they can be in terms of, you know, you've named already some, like digital divide is very important. Technology, the capacity of using data, which Leslie has mentioned earlier, this is really important so that the enterprise can really understand the demand of the market, analyze the requirements, as well as the kind of the potential, the opportunities in the markets, and to position themselves, whether they will be able to export yet. So all kind of capacity, you know, including also marketing, sales, business development, communication, branding, positioning themselves, all kind of knowledge that they need to know. But especially when they aim for export, it requires the new level of expertise. The third key barriers is really the lack of network and access to customer, especially for the small and medium enterprises. Access to foreign customer is really difficult if they are not really very kind of savvy with technology, or for women in particular, lack of network is already been identified as one of the constraints. We've done several research to really understand the barriers, the gender-related barriers of entrepreneurs. And obviously, a networking capacity, networking opportunity has been identified as one of the key constraints of women compared with their male peers. And finally, lack of finance. We all understand that, you know, lack of finance is always in the top 3 constraints of women-led businesses. And if they aim to join the global value chains or aim to access the export markets, a lot of investment they need to put down to be able to get there. And with the inherent lack of finance, it has always been the hurdles for them to decide whether they want to step up the next level. And in such a situation, with this understanding from the women-led SMEs, what have we done to support them? First, of course, we address the shortage in capacities. The capacity, we help them with improve their capacity in market research, in sales, export, development, marketing, branding. For marketing branding, it's interesting to understand that now with the more advanced markets, the consumers and clients do not just care about the quality and the price of the products. They also want to know the story behind the product, who produced those products, how it was produced. So it's really about knowing what to buy. It's very important. So this is some of the key skills and expertise that we are helping to build for women-led businesses, so that when they aim to export their products, they know how to tell their story. You know, each woman has amazing stories to tell if they have good products to sell. Really, this is what we've experienced. Other requirements, other knowledge about labeling and packaging, standards and certificates, logistics, as I've named earlier. So those are the things that we have designed in our programs to support women-led business. And we arrange those training in a very intensive model. With WISE, we've supported over 20,000 women-led women business and women in Vietnam with different kind of business and entrepreneurship training, but with specifically to the group of women who want to export and join the global value chain. We organize them into smaller group of acceleration. So with those, also under the global program Wi-Fi, I'm sure that you all are familiar with the program that ADB is supporting in Vietnam. We have a different accelerator to support women, just a small group of women, like about 30 women in particular, but we have a KPI that for each year we need to promote at least 10 women to really support the products to the European market or to foreign markets. So we provide very intensive training and hands-on coaching and connecting them specifically to the buyers over there. And this is not just with the individual buyers, but it is like we support the B2B business in alongside with B2C business through different channels, building platforms, etc. We also improve network opportunities. Within our network, we have a wide network of international buyers, and just in this event today, I've seen other very potential partners. I really want to reach out later on to really connect the Vietnamese women sellers to their network, and improving access to finance. So this is like there are different ways to do this, but with particular to support women-led business, we provide financial literacy training, really to help them to improve their level of understanding about financing issues, about being prepared for growing their business to the next level, that they can really scale their production and meet the requirements of the export market. We also provide business advisory to improve business soundness. And this is one of the focus of the priorities of the WeFi program in 2021 and up to 2023. So after the COVID pandemic, there's a lot of issues and gaps in the business of women-led business. And that's why we provide advisory and counseling services, really to help the women to address those issues and overcome the problems. We also facilitate the relationship with financial institutions through working with banks, so that they can see that working with lending to women-led business is not just the right thing to do, but the smart things to do. This is not just purely being kind, but this is about being smart, because women-led business are very, very potential customer, very good customers, strong customers. And we have analysis to prove that, to show evidence to financial institutions, so that they can have more incentives to provide more women targeted services that meet the requirements of women. And also we have programs to work with banks on gender training. So really we have provide trainings to staff of the banks, so that they can have a better approach when they reach out to female customers. Female customer and male customer have a different requirements in terms of services from the bank. For example, women tend to be more cautious in making decisions. They need more information. Sometimes that may tire the bank staff if they don't have the insights they don't have the gender knowledge. So they may lose the customer, and the women lose opportunities to access to finance. So this is some of the things that we work to help both the bank, the supply side, and the women business, the demand side, to meet each other and to provide services to each other. And finally, policy advocacy. WISE has been working very actively in Vietnam many years ago, since Vietnam drafted the SME support law. And with SME support law, there is several provisions to provide special support to women-led business, taking into account the difficulties of women. So we continue this process and working with different women business associations to showcase, the constraints, the difficulties, the gender inequality of women accessing services, so that we can promote for improvement in the policy. I know that it's very long, so yeah.
Sorry, Hien, I'm going to have to cut you, because we're being told only another 10 minutes, and we still have one more speaker, and I'd still like to be able to ask some questions of everyone. But thank you so much to Hien from WISE. As you can see, this panel has been kind of structured from having kind of that global view and having the policy and the different policy entry points that we can have, but also then hearing from the work that women entrepreneurs, so the work that women entrepreneurs that WISE has been doing, and we've been very happy at the ADB of collaborating with WISE. But now I'd like to kind of focus now on what the private sector is doing, and they're a very important player in this. And so I'd like to be able to now invite Nusra Chankaew. I hope that's sorry, that's a bit rough. So Global Procurement Director, Strategy and Insight from Unilever. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Keiko. So I thank you, Video and Women, as well, for having me today. If the team can pull off my slide, please. Yes, please. Thank you. So I'll be short, because we are running out of time, and I agree that the discussion will be more fruitful. So I want to leave time for that as well. So you hear it from the, how is it going to be as a best case example from public procurement already earlier, and also from WISE. Now I'm going to talk to you about what is happening in Unilever globally and how to cascade down in our region, which is especially in Unilever in Thailand. In the next slide, if it can move. Gender responsive procurement is not new for Unilever. What is very important is part of global social commitment, which we announced publicly since January 2021. So it's one of the umbrella under this global social commitment, which we aim to help build a more equitable and inclusive society. Aware that we as Unilever, we are participating such a big value chain from end to end, from our suppliers, upstream suppliers, suppliers of the suppliers, or even farmers, until distributors and also the customer in the market as well. So the question for us is that as we are impacting a lot numbers of people, how could we help create more inclusive society? Hence, the goal of gender responsive procurement has been set. We saying that we within year 2025, so we have 4 years since the announcement of this global commitment, we will spend, means we will buy any product or service from diverse business up to 2 billion euros. That's the targets. Then what do we mean by diverse business? And this is where it's a bit different from the previous speakers. For us, we are not only target at women entrepreneur, women SMEs, but in this case, we are covering underrepresented groups into 4. The first one is a woman-owned business. The second one is LGBTQI+. Disability, and also the minority ethnic owned business as well. So we want to ensure that we tackle to this group of people, and not only the business owned, but also the enterprise as well. The gender responsive enterprise will be in the scope of our discussion as well. Next one. So what does it mean for us? How could we, the what is clear, then become on how. If I can zoom in Unilever Thailand, we are interactive with more than 1,300 suppliers. The spending is around 750 million euros a year, based on 2020, and now we are growing every day. So we have 3 key pillars. The first thing first is that we want to grow our existing tier 1 woman-owned business. The second one is that what about recruiting others, discover and also develop the new generation, the new diverse suppliers, the 4 groups that I mentioned earlier. So the idea is not only spend more with them, but also training, equip them with future fit skills, which you will see later on, because we strongly believe that sometimes, most of the time, these people are not equipped well from the future skill set like digital, financial, sustainability. Hence we provide the training together with our alliance. Last but not least, Leslie mentioned earlier, we cannot do this alone. We cannot achieve this alone. So we want to also advocate the Diverse Suppliers Alliance and gender responsive suppliers as well. The target is that we will spend 56 million euros by the end of next year. No, sorry, by the end of year 2025. And we are moving forward on that with the right track. Next slide. So I will not go here, but maybe the last slide, please. So look, in this, yes, go ahead, the last slide on the roadmap, please. So we say that we want to grow the existing tier 1 women-owned suppliers. Discover and develop is something that we struggle as well. And in Thailand, particularly, where we don't have the database of diverse suppliers. not even women-owned suppliers. So the way we do it earlier is that we do it manually. So we call to our 1,300 suppliers to verify if they are women-owned or diversity-owned or not. Hence, we are trying to work with NGOs, private sectors, but also public governance as well. How could we can set up such a database so that we can access directly to them, interact with them, develop them, and finally with the aim that will convert them to be our suppliers. And that's we have been done in Unilever so far. The aim of for me today is that if we can pair up together and set up the alliance to bring this GRP even bigger together, that will be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what a positive note to end your presentation, and also very inspiring on how Unilever has been able to build this up over time and set targets, and also acknowledging some of the ongoing challenges you have and the different approaches you have to try to overcome them. We've been granted another 5 minutes, which is still not enough really to be able to pull everything together. But I wanted to be able to kind of, going back to that concept of the ecosystem, I wanted to kind of bring back the kind of the three panelists. So Leslie and Hien, could you also kind of put your videos back on? And I just had one question really, because I think the comparison with Latin America was pretty stark. So we see quite clearly that Asia Pacific in this report that we are doing with UN Women is really at a very initial stage in terms of that ecosystem development. UN Women is working with several partners, I think, in the Asia Pacific. ADB, we're working in Indonesia with the Ministry of Women on gender responsive procurement, as well as in the Philippines. But again, kind of very, very much early stages. Could you perhaps, like, if each of the speakers very, very briefly give kind of maybe 3 priorities of where you see like the Asia Pacific should kind of focus on in establishing its ecosystem? And I'd love to hear also from the private sector perspective too. So I know that's kind of a very general question, but if you could kind of just give us kind of three areas where you think that most of our investment should be focused on. And sorry, I just wanted to also say that there is a chat box if anybody had any questions and wanted to put them in. And our UN Women colleagues are also inviting us to, at the same time, there's a QR code for to answer a few questions, if you could also do that. So great. So as you're still with us, Nusra, on video, do you want to start?
Yes. So look, I think I can give 3, the most 2, and then additional 1. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is a database. Especially in some country in Asia Pacific, the database is not there. Hence, it's very difficult for us to act. And in order to set up the database, we cannot do it alone. So we need government sectors, NGOs, and private sectors working on this together. Second one is linked to the first one, is alliance. And again, this kind of topics, we cannot act alone in order to create a whole ecosystem. So we need numbers of participants from each of the sectors in order to bring this and evaluate this up even bigger. Last but not least, especially in Thailand, I want to call out my colleagues in private sectors as well, that it's time to start. And I think thinking, mostly we spend a lot of time thinking before start evaluate or assess where we are. I recommend that we start, and then we will know what would be our objective, and then we can put the milestones against that. Thank you.
Thank you. Very inspiring. Hien, I'm going to go in reverse order. Hien, 3 kind of priorities.
Yeah, thank you, Keiko. I was nodding so heartily when the previous panelists talk about data, because this is also the top priority. I think that from my priorities, it should be data from 2 sides. Data for the government and the private sector to understand the necessity of improving gender GRP, gender responsive procurement. And also data, the ability, the capacity to use data by women-led business, because this is really a big gap in women capacity. If they can use data, they can really improve their business much better. The second, probably also the third, because data for government and data for improving data capacity for women-led business. And then the third, I think that should be communication. We should continue to communicate and to raise awareness about the importance of promoting gender responsive procurement and supporting women-led business. Showing this is the smart thing to do for everyone. That would benefit everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hien. Last but not least, Leslie, some advice from Latin America to Asia Pacific.
Yes, I mean, I have to echo what the other two co-panelists said. Data. I mean, it's so important. You know, in order to target the efforts and to know where to make and to be able to evaluate progress. I think that's key. Understanding your market is key from the public sector side. Understanding, you know, where the women-owned businesses and how to better target those so that they can participate in the public procurement market. And then finally, this building of alliances. I mean, public procurement agencies can't go at it alone. You really need to involve the private sector. You really need to, you know, have alliances with other ministries, with other agencies working on this topic to be able to develop a good program. And then also for, as I said in my presentation, for countries to share information and to support each other. We had a very rich experience with that, where countries that were more advanced were able to provide, you know, direct support, you know, to other countries when developing their programs, so they don't repeat the same mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I mean, that was actually a really great example, and that was something that would be great to be able to see, maybe not Asia Pacific, but let's say Southeast Asia, even let's say within ASEAN, to be able to have that kind of network, collaboration, knowledge exchange, troubleshooting. That's, I'm sure some of us will come back to you and to learn some of the steps that you took to do that. So I'm going to have to kind of wrap up, but I'd like to kind of echo some of these three kind of priority areas that our panelists have just shared with us are actually very similar to the 5 strategic recommendations that we have provided with UN Women and ADB in this report, actually. So we call for greater advocacy, policy reform, inclusion of gender in procurement laws whenever possible. Data is also very key. Incentivizing the private sector to not only act, as our colleague from Unilever has just said, but also on monitoring and reporting on their spend. And so so these are some of the kind of key recommendations that are coming up from that report. And again, we'll be happy to share that with you. There. Also, are we given another 5 minutes? I'm just seeing another. Bu, can you let us know?
I can let you know, Keiko, the other group is a little bit behind as well, so you get 5 more minutes. So.
Oh, even better. I was so well. So it's a wrap up, but maybe like, well, Katja is also here, and she's kind of the my partner in crime for this regional report also that we have. Perhaps Katja, you would like to kind of give some thoughts on what you've heard, especially. I've been talking to you a lot about Leslie Harper's work at Inter-American Development Bank. Maybe you would like to kind of, what kind of inspiration did you get from some of the examples that she gave from Latin America?
No, and I
think they're feasible in Asia?
I think, yes, of course, not of course, but yes. And I sent already a message to Leslie that I was really inspired by the presentation. And also I know some of my colleagues who will be implementing more programming on this in the region here. So I think definitely, and some of the things I was especially sort of inspired about is very pragmatic suggestions. Like, for example, what you mentioned, Leslie, sort of in terms of where do we find the suppliers, and sort of, and I know Nusra would probably agree to this, and we started with Unilever, some of the work as well, and some of the other corporates. The standard answer we always get, where do we find the women businesses? It's very difficult. We want to work with them, but we don't find them. And I think there are two truths to that answer. And I think what you have shared is sort of even things like building a catalog, which is maybe not the most technology-enabled solution in the first place, but I really like sort of that you showed there, like initial steps that everyone could actually take, and that don't need to kind of be transformative in the first place how they are implemented, but they can have a transformative impact. So I definitely was quite inspired by that. And some of the things, Keiko, also you have heard it before, but I heard it now from Leslie, a lot of the recommendations that we kind of seen in our paper, I think Leslie has some answers to them. And I think they are not, it really shows to me that this is there's a lot of universal truths, put it that way. I really do think there's a lot of opportunity for learning exchange, and I don't think that the region here has to reinvent and can really kind of piggyback from what others have been doing. So yeah, that's my one sentence of wisdom to that.
Thank you, Katja. No, I completely agree. And I think it's be great to have more interregional also knowledge exchange on that. I wanted to then bring back Hien. Sorry, because it was a wrap up, but now it's not a wrap up as we have a bit more time. And I don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment.
Keiko, Francis has his hand up from Amphori.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Sorry, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Keiko. Thank you, Katja, also for making this possible. Indeed, I think the availability of data is a crucial point. Katja, you mentioned already, and also a couple of speakers, there is a lack of data when it comes to women-owned businesses. And I think with the work that we're currently doing also with you and women, piloting this gender-responsive procurement program as part of the WeEmpowerAsia initiative, we also see that there are other proxies that you could use to really drive women empowerment through your procurement practices. So it does not necessarily have to be focusing on women-owned businesses. Of course, this is a great effort, and Unilever does great work on this, as we've just seen. But also it can be through, for instance, focusing on gender-responsive enterprises. So this is something, Katja, you mentioned already, that you and women is also somehow reframing that concept of gender-responsive procurement towards also, being a bit more flexible as to what exactly that entails. So not just exclusively focusing on women-owned businesses, but also, for instance, businesses that have a fairly gender balanced management structure. As compared to the workforce composition and factory floor level. And also, of course, businesses that have a management system that is gender responsive. So really taking care of women workers in a way that meets their needs, and of course that there's no gender-based discrimination, or that there's an enabling work environment for women. So I think that's quite an interesting learning for us also from this program, to really look at data beyond women ownership, also on, for instance, workforce composition and general management system sensitivity when it comes to gender. So yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you, and sorry I didn't see your hand raised. I also see there is a question from Shibumi Desai, and I think your video is on. Do you?
Yeah. I had another question as well, but yeah.
Okay, well, we have, I think, a few more minutes, so go ahead.
The other question I had was this: another impediment to women joining the workforce or being able to achieve their fullest in the workforce is their menstrual periods. Now, in India, from where I come, it's still a debate as to whether it should be there or not there. Very few organizations have gotten it into practice. Are there any countries in the world where the government has made it a law that menstrual leave needs to be provided?
That's a little bit outside of the scope of this session.
I know it's a little bit outside the scope, but yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be able to provide that. Oh, we've already got 55. So yeah, in short, I'm not really sure, but perhaps someone else could answer that. But maybe on your point about sex segregated data, I think that's a very important question. And I'll try to quickly respond in 45 seconds. So one of the issues that we have is that we lack data on the amount of procurement spend that goes to women-owned business. One of the first is that many countries don't have a definition of women-owned business. Some of the countries in our region do. Indonesia recently adopted one through a presidential regulation. Vietnam has its SME law 2017, which also includes a definition, but many countries don't. So as a result, it's difficult in the systems to be able to identify how much spending is going to women-owned business. I'll stop there because there's 5 more seconds, but thank you for your question.
Thank you.